Hi, this is David Boje, and I'm here to talk to you about what is storytelling process consulting and why your business needs to get to it. Storytelling process consulting is organizational change by changing the story of your future, coming up with a better strategic direction and the storytelling that goes along with it. It's working with small groups all over the organization so that they participate in the organization change and they contribute to the story. Maybe it's not their particular story, but they understand the story and they've got what's called together telling happening. And I'll leave you with a little story. In fact, I'll probably put this story at the beginning. It is that good. So I was working with a consultant in process change, and we had a client. It was a hospital, and this hospital wanted to really restory themselves. They wanted just to do the most radical things to, wake up and get in a new direction because, there were other hospitals around doing better, and their patient load was okay, but not the greatest. They were attracting good doctors. The doctor-nurse relationship was pretty good. But here's the story. We noticed that they'd never slept in their own beds. Doctors and nurses in a hospital need to sleep in their own beds. They need to check in, go through the check-in process, be admitted, eat the hospital food, sleep there all night. And believe me, the hospital was a totally different place the next day. Why? Because they noticed, the doctors and nurses, that when they checked in, they got in the room, wow, there was no art on the wall. There was just a lot of machines and valves and tubes and wires, and it was just awful. So they said, hey, let's put some art in the room. Let's get some art in here, some curtains, cover up some of the machinery. And they started on that the next morning. But one of the biggest changes they noticed was the food. The food was awful. It was hospital food. And they didn't have the facilities, they didn't have the staff to make really good food. So the next day they said, let's hire a chef. We can afford it. We'll hire a chef and we'll get them the equipment they need. So they hired the chef and they became the best place to eat in that community. It was fantastic. Now, one thing that was so funny is they couldn't sleep at night because the pillows had plastic on them. So they woke up the next day and said, why do we got plastic on the pillows? Every time I move, the plastic is going crinkle, 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 and I can't sleep. So they said, well, okay, let's check it out. So they checked out the ordering department, the supplier, and they said, hey, do we have to leave the plastic on the pillows? And he said, no, nobody does that. But evidently, several generations of people ago, they had not taken the plastic off. And so whenever they reordered pillow, they left the plastic on. So they said, take the plastic off so we can get a good night's sleep. So that's an example of organizational change using storytelling in what's called the material storytelling focus. I'm part of the material storytelling lab, and it's headed up by Annette Strand in Denmark. And we take organizations through a redesign process where they come to the lab and they use material objects to say, okay, this is a hospital room, here's a bed, there's a pillow with plastic on it. Oh, how do we redesign it? And we'll change the colors, maybe we'll put some curtains up. That sort of thing allows people to do a organizational change in a quicker time period, more transformationally. Everybody gets involved. They share stories where they're talking about the material storytelling objects they're working with, like a hospital bed, a little doctor, a little nurse, some patients, ambulance, and they lay that out in a sand tray and they can change it around and put different designs in, and they can talk about what they're doing. Several groups can work at once. And so that's what the Material Storytelling Lab does. David Boje, and I've been doing storytelling process consulting for over 4 decades. I've been studying organizational storytelling at the University of Illinois, where I got my PhD a long, long time ago, 4 decades ago. Then I became an assistant professor at UCLA and was there for about 6 years and transferred to Loyola Marymount University, where I got tenure, and I was teacher of the year every year. Then I got married to Grace Ann Roselle. She's beautiful. And we worked together at New Mexico State University for 23 years. Right now I'm at Fisk University. Grace Ann and I are both visiting scholar professors there, and we're going to have our annual conference there, the Organizational Storytelling Conference, this December. You want to check that out, and you can come in on Zoom or you can attend in the flesh. That in the corporate world, people don't really tell a whole story. You could transcribe all the dialogue of that organization for as long as they were having history, and you wouldn't find hardly any stories. Maybe some PR firms came in and created some stories, or maybe during a speech, or maybe a little bit during the annual report. But in conversational storytelling, people don't tell the whole story because you're with people you know. You're with your colleagues, you're with your suppliers, your vendors. Maybe you have a new customer, you got to tell more of the story to that person. But in the organizational storytelling process, usually you tell just a few words, and people in the know, it's kind of a code, and they know, hey, what about that last CEO? All he did was make buildings, build buildings. That's all he cared about. What about the other CEO? Oh, he just hired more staff, more staff. What about the CEO that just created new office space for himself? You know, people know these stories and they use a code. For example, if the police say code 7, they know it's to take a lunch break, get to the donut shop. If they say code 1032, they know it's a man with a gun. And they need to get the units out there. If it's 1033, there's an emergency and they need assistance right away. If it's 1034, it's a riot and they need help too. If it's 1035, there's a major crime alert and they need assistance. Most consultants are not process consultants. They just do a little training on what is storytelling and how it affects communication, but they're not doing process consulting. In process consulting, you do have a diagnosis of the critical problems of the entire organization and its suppliers, its customers, the whole supply chain, the business model. And you got to recognize there's 1,000 storytelling consultants training a skill like elevator pitches or some such thing. 100. All right. A process consultant looks at the stories the organizations is stuck into and they can't quite move on. They can't let go of a strategy and adopt a new strategy because they don't get the new story happening. In organizational change, you want to set a strategic direction. You do it by involvement, by having together listening and storytelling groups, rather. And those storytelling groups let you overcome the resistance to change because they're part of the change. They're part of the design. They're getting all their objections up front and their participation up front. And then when the strategy happens and it's launch day, then they know they participated and they have ownership. And it's all about ownership when you want to do organizational change and you don't want to be fighting all the way down the line with resistance. So please tune in to the storytelling channel here, Organizational Storytelling Process. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the story and got a little bit of understanding about organizational storytelling and what process consulting is. So, storytelling process consulting. Be sure you hire a process consultant, not a communication consultant. It's not about learning a new communication skills. It's about transforming the entire organization. This is David Boje, and I ask you to subscribe because that way you get alerts and you will be able to get notice when I put out a new video. I want to put out 1 or 2 a week and introduce you to the whole storytelling process consultation. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed it. Bye now.